Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the snowstorm edition of the Agile Workplace Leader webinar series. We hope all those of you who are on the East Coast are using your telework and you're safely ensconced in your home office, or the weather let you reach your own office without incident. But either way, thanks very much for joining us today. Our monthly educational lectures and panel discussions are starting off 2014 with an exciting topic, one that sounds as if it's taken directly from those most recent technology innovation blogs. No doubt you've heard stories and news items about things like big data, how mobile apps and cloud solutions are being put together in fascinating ways, and they often create brand new capabilities that make the headlines sound almost like something from Star Trek. Well, today's topic takes us to a combination of technologies and cultural shifts, which will bring a whole new experience to workers and open up organizational benefits so good they're sometimes hard to believe. But we've got today's presenters here to show us the real results and how they're deployable in nearly any environment, whether it's commercial or government. Smart occupancy plus smart buildings is today's topic, and we've got two of the thought leaders behind making these innovations a reality, Larry Melton and John Vivadelli. Larry is the CEO and president at The Building People. He's a board member at the Federal Real Property Association and advisory council member at Realcomm. Many of you will also know John as the CEO who founded AgilQuest 20 years ago, and from his many speaking engagements here and abroad for workplace and real estate strategy groups. The team saved time for audience questions at the end of the talk, so please use the Q&A facility in your WebEx toolbar as the way to submit your questions as you have them during the presentation. After the prepared slides, John and Larry will tackle as many of your questions as we have time for, and we'll be answering them in the order they were submitted. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Larry and John for Smart Occupancy plus Smart Building.
Thank you, Doug. This is John Vivadelli, and thanks all of you for braving the elements and joining us today. What I'd like to do is just start out real quickly with smart occupancy plus smart building is the concept that we're going to be talking about today, and how it can lead to more productive people and more sustainable space. And oftentimes, it's good to explain a new capability or a concept in terms of the familiar. So we're going to talk about four major trends and how those trends relate to each other and how they come together to form this thing called smart occupancy plus smart building. Robert Fulghum wrote a book, and it was titled, All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And guess what his number one learning was in that book of a list of all the things that he found important? The number one thing was share everything. So really, it's kind of interesting that maybe something old is new again. A formal definition of the sharing economy is an ecosystem that leverages information technology, key point, you're leveraging technology to maximize the use of an asset's excess capacity. And you do that through sharing or reuse. Really, very simply put, more sharing means less waste, and that really is fundamental for improved sustainability. There's a gentleman, a mentor of mine named Vern Harnish, who writes for Fortune magazine, back in December wrote an article about the 4 top trends in 2014 that people ought to be looking at. And the sharing economy was one of those 4. And he said that every CEO should be looking for ways to leverage unused assets like sharing office space. So in big terms, what we're talking about, one of the things we're talking about here with smart occupancy plus smart building is the sharing economy. And so let's take a look at a couple of examples of that. So Uber is a participant in the sharing economy, NetJets and Airbnb. And if you think about it, what Uber's doing is it's taking the excess capacity of people's cars and transforming that into money for those people. NetJets is doing the same thing. It's sharing jets for revenue generation, and Airbnb does the same thing for people's homes. You can buy somebody's bedroom for a night on Airbnb. And so what the sharing economy is all about is transforming that excess capacity into dollars.
Yeah, John, first, thanks for having me, and a great opportunity here to talk about smart occupancy and smart building. Your example of the sharing economy is a perfect correlation for what we're going to talk about over the next 40 minutes. As we go through the presentation and the conversation here, what I hope our audience members are listening to is this recurring theme. We're going to be empowering individuals and organizations, companies, whether it's an agency, a landowner, a building owner, whoever it is. You're empowering the individual to enable the sharing and reuse excess capacity. That's essentially the example that Uber, NetJets, and Airbnb have used, and that's where we're going to correlate that back to how does those principles apply to both a building owner, the end user, whether it's a tenant, a building operator, and that's the recurring theme you're going to hear here. But the bottom line is smart occupancy and smart building is not much different, and the one thing that you get out of the concept of a sharing economy in this principle is increased utilization. And that's what we're going to be talking about for the next 40 minutes or so. So get your questions ready, and let's get this conversation going, John.
Okay, next concept, the Internet of Things. At Coronet last year, there was a really good presentation by a gentleman who called this thing Web 3.0. Things talking to things, everything connected. So in one sense, we're talking about creating a network of real estate, connecting real estate together so that it acts as a networked whole. Larry, what do you think about the Internet of Things and how it applies?
So, when the concept of smart occupancy, smart building, you can break it apart, you can mint it any way you want. But the trend you're seeing here is the connectivity of objects, right? That's the bottom line. Everything out there today and in the future is going to be connected to the Internet. Everything will have its own IP address, just like your home address. Everything will be connected remotely. And the ability to present those needs and that data in real time is the mantra that you're going to hear as a recurring theme around the smart occupancy and smart buildings. But that's really the impetus for what makes the success around both objectives.
Okay. So big data. So when you have all these buildings connected in a network of places to go to work, and you have all the building systems, the lighting, the HVAC, the power, and all these systems connected together, the amount of data that's going to be generated by all of that is just huge. And so that's a technical term, huge. So what we're looking at is the ability to first collect this information, but oftentimes people look at big data and they only think about it from a standpoint of reporting against it. In real estate, it might be the actual utilization of space or other terms. But in fact, big data should also be, and it's much better, to have that data operationalized. And what I mean by that is that the data can be acted on right now, this second. So a motion sensor in a Lutron light in a conference room detects motion, or maybe it doesn't detect motion. And if it doesn't detect motion, then it talks to the smart occupancy system and it says, hey, there's no one in this room, cancel this booking. So it's the ability to act on data that does a couple of very important things. Number one is it keeps the data accurate. Operationalizing the data is a fundamental aspect to making sure that the data that you collect is actually accurate and actionable.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
and John, nowadays with real estate, and we're going to talk about this later in the presentation, but operating costs, revenues are going down, operating costs are going up. And either way you slice it, and we'll talk about this a little bit in the next, over the next 30 minutes. But as a property manager for the last 20 years, we've seen this evolution change. And where we used to be sitting in an office or talking to our tenants, the data we had at our fingertips was always 30 days old. It always showed trends. Trend data is old school, as we call it, or not reminiscent of a smart building, and clearly not smart occupancy. What we're talking about with the big data and the examples that John just talked about is enabling decisions in real time, whether that's through dashboarding, business real-time analytics, and there's a lot of real estate technologies out there that can do a lot of things. But the concept around smart occupancy and smart buildings will get you the basic infrastructure you need to make better decisions. And what we like to refer to in the change management aspect of real estate is propagate new norms, change the human behaviors, and change the way we operate real estate today.
So the last concept we're going to bring together here is mobility. So we have this situation where workspace, an old term, is really two things. It's work and space, and they're separate. And you get to choose which one. You get to separate those two and determine where you are going to go. You've got the work day, right? 8 to 5. Well, that's a thing of the past as well, because work and day and time are two separate things. People now have the opportunity to select when they're going to work much more than they ever had. And what that leads to is you have the situation where for most of the world, we're still sitting in seat assignments, and what it really could be and should be is choices of where to go to work.
You know, John, you and I have talked about this for a long time, but I'll tell you the one epiphany I think most of us are having in the real estate business is the traditional choices do not enable maximizing utilization of the workspace, and we know that. Why? Because you don't have the real-time capability of acquiring the space or finding out what's readily available, and that's kind of the impetus for why we need smart occupancy. So let's go into the powerful combination. You heard John talk about the four areas. Mobility, obviously, it's big. The Internet of Things and connecting everything. These four concepts, everyone heard about mobility. This isn't new. Internet of Things, guess what? It's happening whether you knew what Internet of Things was or not. The sharing economy is a basic principle that we all know is a business model and a concept that works. The more we share information, and the more we connect to information enables better decision. And that's the whole concept around the need for big data. Big data is a necessity, and these four concepts collectively will enable smart occupancy and smart buildings to be successful. So these are kind of the four principles, and I want to emphasize that when you think of smart occupancy, smart buildings, focus on these four big principles as areas and concepts as some of the key foundational components to moving forward.
And Larry, the way I look at it is we've just managed to take every major buzzword out there and tie them all together into one unified theory. I think Mr. Einstein would be very proud of us at this point. So now let's get into the process around smart occupancy plus smart building. And we, as purveyors of new workplace, we kind of look at things a little bit in a skewed manner because most of the world is still living here, where people are going from their home to work and back again. And that problem, that situation is where many of our customers and many of you may be right now, which is a majority of your people they're living at home and they're working in an assigned office and they're going back and forth in a commute. So the traditional view of a portfolio is kind of the same thing, which is it's discrete and disconnected. You've got the headquarters buildings, you've got home, you've got third places like Starbucks and Panera and business suites and all the new kinds of places that are springing up here and there. But they're all thought about in a discrete and disconnected way.
And John, when you look at that discrete and disconnected model, just from a labor-intensive standpoint, you can look at that snapshot of that picture and say, well, that's going to take X amount of resources to manage. And we all know that the labor and the intensity of labor needed to manage a larger portfolio that is underutilized takes a lot of energy, and I don't mean energy as in BTUs, but a lot of energy from a labor and resource intensity standpoint. So why not find a way to get a smarter building, drive labor costs down, energy intensity would improve, and utilization goes up. Let's go to the next slide, John.
Okay, so one of the first things that we ought to think about as we're going through this process of smart occupancy and smart building is to say, let's tie together these discrete places where people go to work in what we would call a network of space. It's transforming individual discrete buildings into something that is shared and connected. And it's not only the buildings themselves, the places to go to work, but it's the systems that are in each one of those buildings need to be shared and connected as well.
So now as an end user, as a property manager or building operator, you can see just from this graphic, I have a lot more information in my hands to enable me to make better decisions.
Cool. So let's go quickly into, so the next step is once all this stuff is connected, then you can take, and you're collecting that big data, and your people are having choices about where they're going to work, and you're understanding that actual use and that presence, and the building systems are all connected. You can do something with that, which is to consolidate the real estate and to cut so that you can get down to a much more efficient infrastructure. So we'll just go through that a little bit.
Yep. So when you look at this and you break this down, now we take it down to the building level. You know, smart buildings, you know, here's a news flash. All these things, lighting, security, HVAC, fire, most of you can look at the screen and figure out that these are components that exist in a building today. Here's breaking news. Computers have been running these systems for years. So just connecting a computer to these systems doesn't make them smart. In fact, I would say what makes them smart is the interconnectivity that John talked about in the last slide. And when you connect these systems, so just imagine if you looked at all these disparate systems operating independently, and now when you look at the graphic, as John just highlighted on the screen, you can see now we've got all these systems on one unified network. We've converged the network, we've converged the systems into one platform. That's key. You know, the component here, we've used it as an example, and it's widely known in the workplace around smart buildings, is the Tritium Niagara framework has been an impetus for making this connectivity work. We don't get into great detail on that today, but if there's a question or follow-up that anyone wants to talk about, how did it actually work, we'd be happy to answer that offline.
So we're going to cover at the end some of the key learnings around how do you actually put together this thing called smart building, but just to kind of follow along Larry's comment around that, getting an open architecture that allows all these different systems to talk together, and Tritium is a very good one. The company's right here out of Richmond, Virginia. To connect these building systems together is what we were able to use and deploy at GSA, which is the discussion that we're going to have here in a little bit, which is an example of how all this stuff works and how it's actually working today. So this isn't theory, this is practice of taking all these building systems and putting them together. And the critical thing then is to take this smart occupancy system, which is connecting all these buildings together so people have freedom of choice of where to go. They get to choose. And, you know, they've already voted with their feet. People have voted with their feet. Traditionally, across the United States and Europe, real estate is vacant 60 to 70% of the time. We've all know the numbers. Very conservatively, more than 50% of the time. So by putting these two things together, the systems that allow people to choose where they are, who work, and understand where their colleagues are to increase collaboration, pick the places where they can go to work that match the task for that particular period of time, tying that together with building systems and having all this stuff work together provides tremendous value, and that's what we're going to talk about now.
So let me just emphasize there, John, when you go back to that slide, oops, back, there you go. So there's the main concept here that you just heard us talk about. There's three principles you need to really know about. Number one, the systems have to be open. You heard John and I talk about that. You want to converge the systems, and you can see the graphic on the screen is a good representation of how those systems are converged. And then you want to position yourself all around the data and how to normalize that data to position yourself to do something with the data. So the three terminologies you commonly hear in the smart buildings world is open, converged, and normalized. Thanks, John.
Cool.
So at headquarters, GSA headquarters, 1800F Street, Northwest DC, is a good example of a building that converged those systems. It's on an open system that John talked about, the Tritium Niagara framework, which is just one example of how it can be done. They converge those systems. So again, this is a little bit better of a graphic that shows you a representation of all those systems and how they were connected into one integrated network. They leverage those facility systems essentially to go back. Thank you, John. To put them on one operational system, and that's the key here. Again, when you go back to that graphic that showed all the interconnectivity, that interconnectivity of the operational system enables you to get data out of all the systems in a unified format under a collective model. Thanks, John.
So let's talk about quickly the driving forces that made the government do this thing called Smart Occupancy plus Smart Building. Don't expect you to, this is an eye chart, lots of different words on it. Really what it comes down to is that the number of directives and laws and initiatives and standards that have been set by the government from sustainability to business continuity, COOP in the government, continuity of operations, to freedom and flexibility for the workforce, to real estate reduction, all these to telework and the ability to have to increase the workforce, all of these constant stream of driving forces can be addressed and aided by Smart Occupancy plus Smart Building. And the key one happens to be, ta-da, the budget. We've all heard of sequestration. The wrangling on Capitol Hill. What happened is the bottom x-axis is years. The y-axis is in lots of money. And we started to see with GSA that the revenues were starting to split and decrease compared to what the spending was. And this was an unsustainable model. I think other people in the civilian world probably go through the same thing, where you're looking at it and going, I must cut some costs, and I've got to be much more efficient in order to be able to compete on a global basis.
Yeah.
Larry?
Yeah, no, so, John, you could use this slide over and over. This is your business case for or why Smart Occupancy or why Smart Buildings. Let's just focus on Smart Buildings alone and look at this slide. And replace the term spending with operating costs. The reality is, and everyone knows, everyone out there, whether you're a building owner or you're a sustainability expert, energy and sustainability expert, building operator knows, energy consumption over the last 10 years, over the same trend you see on this chart, has dropped across every portfolio nationwide pretty significantly over the 10-year period. In fact, you could take that green line and make it go from the top left corner all the way down to the bottom right corner to show the trends in the way energy consumption has gone across real estate portfolios nationwide, both commercial and federal. However, during that same trend, operating costs continue to rise, which makes the case that energy intensity alone, energy consumption alone, will not save you dollars. You have got to focus on what are the driving forces of that operating expense. And those operating expense, a lot is driven around the technology, the integration, and how you leverage your connectivity to the buildings. In order to get the real-time data out of it, you can lower your operating costs by investing in smart buildings models. That essentially, and I know I made that pretty simplistic terms, but there's much more to it. But there's a whole concept there that could drive the business case alone for smart buildings.
So let's talk about at GSA what the value was or is. So GSA took around 4,000 people out of 4 locations, 4 leases, and after they measured the actual use of how that space was being used, they decided that they needed to consolidate and cut, just like as we talked about before. So those 2,000 workspaces now support 4,000 people. Before, there were more than 4,000 workspaces to support those 4,000 people in the assigned model. In the smart occupancy model, they were able to leverage the mobility of people and the connection of the real estate into a network of places to go to work to leverage that, so that that space now supports 4,000 people or in 2,000 spaces. Round figures in the GSA portfolio, it's a rough average is about $12,000 per workspace per year. In DC, it's more, but rough figures, we just used a conservative number. So at GSA 1800F, one building alone was able to annually save $24 million in real estate cost reduction, occupancy cost reduction. 16 million kilowatts of energy was reduced, and 16,000 metric tons of CO2 was avoided by doing this thing called Smart Occupancy plus Smart Building.
And John, there's one key component here that you cannot do unless you do Smart Occupancy and Smart Building. The one thing that was able to happen at 1800F, and as buildings become smarter and draw Smart Occupancy into the mix, the one thing we can do is measure on a per capita basis. You cannot measure the energy consumption, the real estate cost, the operating cost, your IT cost, all the way down to the end user without this kind of technology and without these concepts. You just can't. You can take averages, you can do all the surveying you want, but without this model of connectivity, you cannot get that per capita measurement, and that's just the way that in itself is worth $1 million in savings that was attributed to the 1800F project.
So when you get to metrics and you start thinking about metrics in Smart Occupancy plus Smart Building, you know, Larry said it per capita, I'll say it a different way, which is you need to get energy intensity per person versus energy intensity per square foot. It's a per person model, especially when you're able to support 2,000, 4,000, 6,000, 8,000. We're not done yet at GSA. 4,000 was the start. 2-to-1 occupancy ratio was the start. We're looking at ways of doing even more there. And so when you're talking about energy intensity per person or CO2 per person or occupancy cost per person, you can see where by getting that leverage, that 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1 leverage, you really can drive that cost down.
What GSA has done in that model, John, is made a perfect business case for the one who dies with the most space does not win. I mean, that's essentially the business case they've made. It's not about having a big office. It's not about having more space. It's about utilizing it to maximum efficiency. And that's the perfect example that GSA has done as a government agency for all these other agencies.
So we're going to go through a day in the life of a GSA employee. They might be at home and they're decide, you know what, I think I need to go to work down at 1800F. So through the Smart Occupancy system, they go and they select a place to go to work. Space is selected at 1800F, and then when they get close to the building, there is, based on the location-based services that are provided in the Smart Occupancy system, they can get checked in or their presence is verified to the building systems. Hey, I know that Larry's here now. And there's a couple of ways of that being done. One is through location-based services. Another one is through the turnstiles on the security system. And another one might be through digital signage. There's different ways of getting it done, but this is part and parcel of what we talked about before, which is operationalizing the data. Getting the data collected across every transaction that occurs in this in the portfolio, so that then you can do something with that data. And the things that you do with that data are, with its connectivity through Tritium, is
the most important piece.
Go ahead, go.
Turning the building on. You know, John, this is the part that it is a game changer for real-time operations. So to put it in perspective, the employee shows up to work, like John said, using a mobile app. They show up, and now, when they show up, power turns on based on the per-person need. No longer do you need to turn on the entire building system in anticipation of what's going to happen. You're turning the building on based on what's really happening. It's real time.
So the HVAC is controlled by actual presence. The physical power to the desk is controlled by physical presence, and the lighting is controlled by physical presence, or not, depending on whether that person is there or not there.
One of the other unique things that they're doing at GSA that is a game changer we might want to talk about just for 2 seconds here, John, is now GSA is a perfect example of a test bed where the occupants, so this gentleman at the desk now, imagine they get too hot or too cold. Now they're able to control that space to their liking. They are playing a part in the way the building's being operated. Now some would say, well, are you giving the end user capability to adjust the building systems? Well, yes, that's exactly right. And what studies show is that enabling the end user to make that decision makes them a better steward of energy savings, and being a part of the solution and the savings model that you're trying to achieve. So now you get into the engagement piece, which is probably a whole different webinar, John, around the human behavior aspects of engaging the employee in this. But you can see when you engage an employee in this capacity, they feel empowered around the workplace to make real-time decisions for themselves.
Yep. So that app was work done by a company called IBIS, Integrated Building Systems, out of San Ramon, California. IBIS was the master systems integrator at GSA. So this, through the work with IBIS and Tritium and Lutron and Siemens and AgilQuest, all these pieces and parts and systems all brought together to create a great environment for the individuals and a very efficient operation as well. So let's talk about, we're kind of getting to the wrap-up here, a couple of slides. One is, let's talk about how to get there and do like a little bit of a recap here of steps to get to smart occupancy plus smart building. Smart occupancy, really it's a heck of a lot easier to do this if you've got executive commitment, right? As we all know, that's a critical piece of this. The idea of understanding what the business goal is, whether you're collecting data for utilization, I have this conversation so many times. Hey, I want to collect utilization information. Great. Why? What's the business purpose? What is it that you're trying, what's the business question you're trying to answer? And take that back up through the real estate business case all the way up to the company strategy, and link that metric all the way through back up to the company strategy is absolutely critical. And as Larry said, if you can't measure the actual use of space and presence, if you don't know who's in your building very accurately, or at least continuously, consistently, and systematically, then you can't get to those per person kinds of metrics and energy intensities that you need to get. Larry, comment?
Yeah, no, just to add on, I mean, I think you can see here, based on our point earlier about the open conversion, normalizing positioning for normalizing the data, we're going to talk about a pretty key component in the next slide, but so I'll hold off on talking about the standardization across programs and how that plays a key role. But the one thing I want to just emphasize around defining the business case of smart buildings, John, if I could just go into that just for a second, is most people say, well, I don't have money to invest, so I can't do it. And that is actually the wrong business case, and that's just a false pretense as to why you shouldn't do smart buildings. The reality is your operating costs, let's just say they stay normalized over a period of 3 years. You could reduce those operating costs by converging your building systems. And in converging your building systems and looking at the data, you will see a return in operating costs, in lower operating costs, almost guaranteed if you establish the metrics, look at your both mechanical costs, your cleaning costs, and your utility costs as a whole. You will, and define those metrics within certain parameters of what you need to do to achieve both a lower operating cost, a mid operating cost, a high level operating cost, and a low operating cost, and setting those metrics and standards. You will set a great roadmap for success by creating that the business case around that. So as we deploy those action-oriented, and you're looking at action-oriented analytics around the data that comes out of it, that will position you to make greater expand on your business case across the portfolio beyond just the one building, whether you pilot it or not. So, John?
Okay. So, smart occupancy plus smart building, pulling these two things together really puts you in a situation where you can deliver the more productive people and get to a much more sustainable building, which means a much more efficient building. So let's go down. I believe this is going to be the last slide. And
yeah, so I talked about the standardization, and this is probably one of the most single, if there's a slide to take away on smart buildings, this is the one we like you to focus on. It's what we commonly refer to in the industry as those three major pillars, the technology, the buildings, and the people. One of the key components here is when you look at your organization, most of you are part of a real estate organization, and you're a transaction manager or a strategy person in some component of the organization, and you probably fall into one of these three buckets. You're either a change agent or you're a transaction manager dealing with the customer and the end user, you're a building operator and you're dealing with the day-to-day operations, or you're a technology guru or somewhere in your CIO shop that's driving the connectivity to the entire building system. The most important component, as we see it, is that organizational alignment. Too many times, too often do we see, and let's just focus on maybe the building side. The building side is also known more as the real estate strategist and the facilities management group. The technology folks are the CIOs of the world. Driving that organizational alignment around those two components is critical. Success will not happen in one pillar of the organization. A siloed approach will be doomed for disaster. So driving towards organizational alignment is critical. But when you focus on the technology, I think you've heard me say this, so I won't beat a dead horse, and I want to get to some of your questions, and I'd like it to be a conversation. But you've obviously got to move the work to the worker rather than the people to the work. And we like to say, and I think the smart occupancy is a great example of that. Obviously, securing the data, the information, and the communication is key so that you can actually do something with it. From a building perspective, I think we've said it. I think this will be about the fourth or fifth time we've said it. Open, the non-proprietary systems, the converged, uniformly connected, and then normalizing, which enables you to take those real-time building analytics and do something with it. Drive action. And again, around the people, yes, there will be a change management mindset needed. That is tough. It's one of the hardest parts. So, again, the three pillars of success, technology, buildings, people. John, I know you probably want to add some stuff to this.
Just one comment. We were talking to Frank Santella, who's actually took over for Larry at GSA, Assistant Commissioner there. When GSA was doing this early on, they had two different initiatives. They had a buildings initiative to cut real estate size and costs, and then they had a smart buildings initiative to look at connecting building systems together. And it wasn't until we looked at it and said, wait a minute, why are we working separately in two different silos? and this often is the case with many large organizations, there are efforts and there are initiatives happening in large organizations that aren't connected, especially when it comes to things like technology and real estate and HR. They very often are separate. But what the great learning was that Frank said when we were talking to him yesterday is the great learning was, oh my gosh, being able to take these things and realizing that when you put them together, in his words, you get 1 + 1 = 3. That's really the synergy of that is tremendous.
Yep.
So
with that, I think we'd like this to be a conversation. Hopefully we've sparked your interest, and we'd like to see if you all have questions out there.
Well, Larry and John, what an exciting topic. I love the slides where you can actually see the interaction of the devices and the people taking an effect on the environment itself. That is such a powerful thing. It's awesome to see all this cool technology put to good use and put in the hands of the people who actually have the ability to affect some kind of real change. So we've got a handful of questions that have been typed in already. This is an excellent opportunity for you to use the Q&A facility that's right there in your WebEx toolbar. Just type in your question and send it to us. I think we've got another 18 minutes here, so we've probably got time to get through most of your questions. Let's see, the very first one has come in pretty early, and this has to do with, we're showing smart occupancy and smart buildings in a particular order. Are there any advantages to implementing smart occupancy and smart buildings in a particular order?
Yeah, we've seen it both ways, haven't we, John? I know that, for John and I, we both experienced it in reverse orders, but we've seen the smart occupancy implemented concurrently with smart buildings at 1800F. But I think smart occupancy around workplace strategies as a whole was probably moving further along at the 1800F project prior to the smart buildings component. I think, my opinion, and I know, John, you probably have one too, I think so long as you have the entire roadmap of success, and that's kind of the big picture that we talked about in the very beginning, I think a roadmap to success is critical. I don't think you don't do one because you can't do the other. You got to move on one of them. If you got to pick one, pick one. Just don't not do one or the other. Just pick one and do it. But I think as you go far along, for instance, if you go down the road of smart occupancy, I think you're going to find yourself wanting to pour gas on it, which gets you to the smart buildings concept. And that's that sharing model that John talked about, is you will start to get more information out, and then you'll realize that you can now expand on that all the way up in the portfolio level to the building level, so why wouldn't you? So smart occupancy will definitely give you the impetus for a greater business case, no doubt. But collectively, I think both of them get you the returns you're looking for. I think, in my opinion, you could either, if you can't run both, certainly do smart occupancy and focus on that utilization of the building in real time. John, I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in big picture terms, if you can figure out that you don't need some part of your portfolio, then don't take the time to make pieces of your portfolio, parts of your portfolio smart whenever you don't need them. So my view is understand how much you need and then make the remainder smart. And that oftentimes gives you the best bang for the buck. But I would agree with Larry that do something, one or the other. But I think if you, it kind of goes along with refitting your space and new furniture. Do the smart occupancy piece first. Get rid of the space that you don't need. Then make what remains nicer or smarter. It tends to work better that way. That's my opinion.
Yeah, inaction will cost you money. That's the bottom line.
And if I understood that next last slide there, when you, regardless of the order that you do them in, when you connect one to the other, that's when you really unlock with that huge change that comes from the smart buildings actually knowing when they need to deliver services and when they can remain dark. It's really amazing. Next question here is on the smart building side, LEED certified. So it looks like somebody is asking, when you say smart buildings, are you talking about LEED certified buildings? Is that the same thing?
Great question. So green does not necessarily mean smart. So that's a great question, and let's use LEED as an example because that sounds like that was a specific question. So I can walk into a LEED Platinum building, and I can let's just say it was built LEED Platinum, has a really nice plaque in the lobby, and it makes everybody feel really good. But there is a good chance, or there's a chance, I should say, that those operating costs in that building are high, and that the mechanical costs and the utility costs are above normal. Which is why the LEED EBOM, LEED Existing Building Operations and Maintenance, is a key component to making sure your LEED building stays green. So just because you build a LEED building doesn't mean it's going to operate efficiently as you built it. It means you have to have an operator that knows what the expectations are. So that's to answer the LEED versus LEED EBOM, and LEED EBOM, EBOM, stands for Existing Building Operation and Maintenance. So now, you can have a smart building that is not as sustainable as you would like it to be. Hopefully, your data will give you enough analytics out of it to position you to make better decisions around your greening investments. So, not to mix up, so a lot of people mix green technologies as a whole up with smart buildings, and green technologies are referred to as like photovoltaics. Those are good examples of green technologies that may or may not be integrated smartly into the converged network. So if you put a photovoltaic on the roof and you didn't integrate it into the smart buildings platform, then it kind of begs the question of efficiency.
And a green LEED certified building certainly doesn't mean smart occupancy.
That's right.
There is no provision for this per person kind of thinking, this 2,000 people in 1,000 workspaces or 5,000 people in 2,000 workspaces. So a green or LEED certified platinum building may or may not be, and this is a study done in 2007, it's almost a coin flip as to whether the building itself is going to be more efficient than normal stock or less efficient than normal stock. And it certainly doesn't take advantage of, there's no provision for understanding the smart occupancy side of it.
Perfect.
Doug?
We've actually got two questions here that only just now came in, but they sound like they're perfect follow-ons for the subject you guys are on right this second. The first one here is, for large corporations that have a varied portfolio, do you two have any suggestions on how you connect the buildings that have some kind of smart technology, but they're managed by different landlords?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. That's a pretty common problem, especially around the federal government portfolio, mainly because you're dealing with both owned assets and leased assets. So the leased assets, you can't mandate that a building owner put smart technology in. Or it begs the question, can you? And I think the recommendation I would have there is that you can get towards smart technology in those different landlords by instituting smart technology lease clauses in your lease, or smart occupancy lease clauses in your lease. There are ways to do that. I know that GSA has inserted, I think they refer to it as green lease clauses, which is contrary to what I just said with the name itself on green leasing or green clauses. But as a whole, when you look at it, you can do something in the very portfolio of leased buildings. It's just that you got to embed those in your lease agreements, in your standard lease agreements. So there's a complexity to it, but you can. John, you want to add anything?
Yeah, just another thought on that is, who's paying for the utilities? And depending on who's paying for the utilities, if it's the landlord, then introducing a concept to help him reduce, he or she, to reduce that expense would oftentimes be thought of as a good thing, and they might play the game. So it kind of depends, but I think a conversation that, smart buildings, landlords have been thinking about this as well. They're trying to figure out how to reduce their operating costs as well. So it may not be as difficult as you might think if you have that relationship with the landlord and say, hey, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to reduce our operating costs. You're trying to reduce your operating costs. Let's figure out how we might be able to work together to do this, and kind of tie it together. And that really there's a business case under there that needs to be developed that both participants get to benefit from.
Yeah, and then you get the shared incentive model, which is, that's just a bonus round.
Yep.
And I know from the inquiries and work that we've had with the landlords themselves, they're looking at what are these technologies can they add to make themselves more attractive to retaining those clients and to bringing in new prospects. It makes a lot of sense. The other question we want to kind of jump ahead here on is along the same lines. How would you handle the parts of the infrastructure that you can't put on a network? Is there some provision in here? Is there some way of still including that in part of the smart building, smart occupancy solution, even if they're not networkable?
Yeah, so I can tell you that not every building should be a smart building. So you certainly should make a business case of investment. If you have a building that is extremely remote and small and doesn't have excessive operating costs, it probably doesn't make sense to invest in a smart building. That's one part of the answer, but that maybe doesn't answer the capability of being able to. So there are remote capabilities. There is wireless. There's other options out there, not just the hardening through fiber in the building. So there are complexities around. Some assets are just either, I certainly wouldn't say old. There is no asset too old to make smart. And I think GSA has been a great example of how they dealt with that. If I recall, they had one of their buildings in the Fast 50 or in the GSA Link building project, I believe it was out of Boston, is one of the historic buildings. And it has one of the smart building technologies in it. So there are curveballs you get with the infrastructure, but there's also solutions around in the marketplace to deal with that. If there's a specific need, let us know, and we can follow up in greater detail with you offline if you want to follow up with us you have our contact information.
And Larry, I know that you've got the analytics on the building side covered within the presentation, and I know John was one of the creators of the Commander BI business intelligence for workplace. Do those kinds of products allow you to take the data coming out of the buildings that are on the network and model it so that you can project those results, those kind of expected results on the assets where perhaps it's not possible to see every single person coming in? Can you still take that data and the trends that you're seeing and apply that to those buildings?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can. In that case, there is not a limitation, but yeah, absolutely.
Terrific. Another question here is more on the people side, it sounds. We've got many different kinds of people, and they list like millennials and boomers, et cetera, and different work styles, such as siloed or collaborative or road warriors. How do you create an environment that allows people to use these assets together, to work together?
Yeah, I think that's what freedom and choice, and that's what smart occupancy is all about, is you allow people to work the way that they need to work to be as productive as they need to be. So oftentimes a person would say, well, the term I heard was siloed, which means that I tend to work by myself or on my own for a particular portion of my workday or my tasks. Well, oftentimes people will equate that to say, well, I need to have my own assigned desk. Or there's another way of looking at it, which is if you're going to be siloed, you could be siloed anywhere. You could be siloed at your home. You could be siloed at a business suite. You could be siloed in your downtown office. So it's thinking about space and people as two different things, or the work that people do as two different things, and then figuring out where's the best place for this person and this task to be done, and remove the constraint that says it always has to be in one place. And I think that's the fundamentals of smart occupancy is just that. And then you allow people to choose where they want to go. And as we've seen with the data, they've already chosen. That people have voted with their feet, and they're voting to more often work outside of a traditional office than inside.
Yeah, and John touched on it earlier when he talked about the organizational alignment, when I talked about those three pillars, the technology, buildings, and the people piece. But don't underestimate the power that your human resources office and partner and business line plays in being strategic with your real estate folks and your workplace strategist folks. What we're seeing with clients, over the last year and working with clients, almost all of our clients in the context of a conversation around workplace, real estate, or facility strategy almost always drive the conversation into some human capital need to understand the dynamics of the people and understanding the workforce requirements, understanding how different the workforce is, and understanding there is a generational gap with the way people work. So you do have to understand that, but that's the key component, and having a human capital strategy or strategist as part of your recommendation in the workplace is key. That's how we've seen the successful model work.
And just real quickly, I just wanted to go back. There was the question about how do you handle parts of the infrastructure that are not able to be put on the network. One thought on that is, don't beat yourself up and ram your head into a brick wall. Go to where it's easier to start. And oftentimes, the low-hanging fruit, every large organization is going to have some portion of their portfolio come due every year. I don't know if it's 10% or 15%, or there's some percentage of your portfolio is coming due every year for a lease, on a lease. So why don't you take a look at that? Look at the opportunity of what can I do with that lease expiration event? Can I implement smart occupancy on that? And then when you're doing site selection with your consultants or your real estate people on the site selection side, say, hey, I want, as part of my criterion for site selection, to be, I need a smart building. I want a building that has the systems connected together so that, and I want that granularity of control down to, if I can't get it to the workspace level, maybe I could get it to a smaller control than a floor. Maybe I can get it to an area. Maybe I could get it to a little, like in GSA's case, it's a bay of 6 desks. So control of HVAC, lighting, and power is down at a bay level of 6 desks. So try to get the granularity as low as it possibly can be, so that when you're looking at new space and thinking about it, use that as one of the criteria for site selection.
Terrific. Well, we've only got 2 minutes here left, so I think the last question I'm going to be able to answer now is, so you presented and shown some of the big results that GSA was able to get. How long did it take from start to finish?
So, from the strategy on smart buildings, and maybe I'll talk about that, and then John, I know you were intricately involved in the evolution of workplace. The Smart Buildings program, really started in about 2008, 2009 around the strategy, just the strategy itself. Today, GSA has about 50 buildings on a converged network. They're looking at the results right now around the data and analytics under an IBM contract. So that contract was awarded in 2011, 12. So you're talking 2.5 years really to get that program up and running and seeing the results to get to this capability model that we've talked about for the last hour. And smart occupancy, John, I think that started for 1800F, probably started a little bit around 2010. So
Right.
it took about a year and a half.
Yeah, end of 2010 was when we really started to, and that was, we got introduced. They had some swing space working, so there was swing space. They were looking at figuring out the use of space. They were looking at how to collapse people out of the leases that were there. So, a lot of this has to do with leases, lease terms, what's possible. The implementation of smart occupancy is not the long pole in the tent. The long pole in the tent is going to be things like, can I do this? Do my leases allow this to happen? When is my lease event? Putting this together, and then and again, it's the technology is frankly the easy part. It comes down to people and training and change management and making sure that that's all done. And the critical thing that GSA had is they had leadership. Martha Johnson, she was the one that just said, this is going to happen, and that really helped things move along.
Yep.
Well, we are at time here, guys. So Larry and John, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience and all those wonderful examples of how that technology is being applied to smart occupancy plus smart buildings. And thanks to everybody in the audience for attending today and for your great questions. We do want to tell you that the webinar was recorded today, so make sure you're looking your email for a link to the recording, and you can share the presentation with others in your organization or review it anytime you like. We will be having more webinars every month this year. Next webinar in February is probably going to be on COOP, Continuity of Operations and Business Resiliency. So keep your eyes out open for those announcements in your inbox. And thanks again from all of us here at AgilQuest. Have a great rest of your day.